this point, it is my very, very great pleasure to introduce our special guest for the evening, Wilson Cruz, who I think is my very first Hollywood star. So I'm particularly starstruck at this point in time. Wilson, as you undoubtedly are aware, played the very first openly gay character on network TV as Ricky Vasquez in My So-Called Life. He has followed that with a string of notable and wonderful performances on TV, on the stage, in the movies, and is currently playing Dr. Hugh Culber on Star Trek Discovery. And I have told Wilson that I will not ask, but maybe someone in the audience will want to know, when's the third season coming? But importantly, for all of us, Wilson is also an extraordinary advocate for LGBT people and a mentor to LGBT youth, and particularly LGBT youth of color. He has been recognized by literally dozens of awards for his acting and for his humanitarian work on behalf of our vulnerable community. And it is an extraordinary pleasure to say that he is the recipient of the Williams Institute's 2020 Impact Award, which we could not think of a better recipient to receive. So I am going to be quiet for the most part, because I know that Wilson is the guy we all want to hear from. And I think that I'll just start it off with a question. I thought we could talk, Wilson, initially about just your experiences of coming out, because I know that you've talked and written about that, and it was obviously a stressful, emotional thing. So maybe you could start by telling us, how old were you when you came out, and what year was that, if you don't mind sharing? People who are better than I am in math can calculate how old you are now. And tell us what made you decide at that point in time to reveal your sexual orientation.
Well, first of all, I have to start by saying thank you so much for not only this award, but for allowing me to have this conversation with you tonight. I am an enormous fan of the Williams Institute and the research that you all do, and I'm incredibly grateful as a member of this community for all of the work that you have done on various issues that have faced our community. I know that without the Williams Institute, we would not have won many of the fights that we have. That we have faced. I meant to turn all of that off. That was Alec Mappa. Sorry, I don't know how to turn that off. I can't do that right now.
It's always reassuring to me when people are as technologically confused as I am. So
I know how to,
this is good.
1 second. If you give me 1 second, I know how to do this.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna put the do not disturb thing on, because actually I do know how to do that. Look at that, I did it.
Okay, I applaud you.
So anyway.
You probably do math also.
I'm so sorry. So anyway, thank you for that. Thank you for this, and I'm truly humbled to be here tonight, really. So, I came out, well, I think for everyone, coming out is a process, right? We come out to friends, and then we come out to family, and in my case, that's when I finally came out publicly. But I came out when I was 16 in 1990, 15, 16 in 1990. I was a junior in high school, and I came out to friends first. And funny enough, there were 5 of us in high school who were out to each other, all male. We didn't know any lesbians, sorry. But, we were all from various races, I was Puerto Rican. We had my friend Brian was Black, John Palestinian, Jaime was Puerto Rican and Japanese, and I called him Susie Wong in my head. Was together, that was his nickname. He was Korean. So anyway, we were all out to each other, Sean. We were all out to each other in high school. And that was like my personal GSA. And we were supportive of each other and kind of saw ourselves through our junior and senior year. And together, we really educated ourselves about LGBTQ issues. We found, a rap group at the community center in town. We were active in HIV and AIDS activism. We went to the DC March together later on when we were older. So this was a huge support system for me growing, in those years leading up to graduating from high school. And then soon after I graduated from high school, I started to work professionally as an actor. And I got my first role when I was 18 years old. And then when I was 19, I was cast in My So-Called Life. And, I knew pretty early on, probably when I was auditioning for it, that whoever played this role was going to have to take on the responsibility that came along with it, and be a public figure who could speak to the issues of LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ people in general. And so knowing that and having that knowledge meant that I needed to come out to my family. So they didn't have to see it on television first. And so to make a long story short, because we have limited time, I came out to my mother first when she asked me about it. I made a deal with myself that if the next time that they asked, I would come out to them. And my mother asked first, and she took it okay. She had a bit of a Puerto Rican woman meltdown, a little Catholic meltdown for about a day, and then she was fine. And then at the end of that year, in '93, my father asked me about it on Christmas Eve. And I came out to him that night, and it did not go well. My entire family was present at our house for Christmas Eve, because we celebrate Christmas Eve. And he chased me out of the house and into my car and threw me out of the house. Now, in terms of timeline, what people should know is that we were supposed to start filming the series of My So-Called Life 3 months later. And so I had a 3-month period where I needed to figure out how to survive so that I could start the show and start my life, really, is how I was looking at it. And so, through a combination of friends who let me sleep on their couches and the backseat of my car, for 3 months, I figured it out. I made way. And I got it done. He and I remained estranged for about a year. And it was because of that series when it started airing. And the fact that my character, Ricky himself, went through a very similar situation. And we did an episode about that, that he eventually watched that night. And because of that episode, he was able to pick up the phone and start a dialogue where we could reintroduce ourselves to each other.
This is a very powerful and upsetting, but ultimately affirming story. And it's interesting because your experience is borne out by our research. So for example, we are going to be releasing, I think within a couple of hours, new data about the extent to which LGBT people are homeless. And in response to questions about lifetime experiences of homelessness, what we've discovered is that 17% of LGBT people have reported having incidences of homelessness in their lifetimes, which is more than twice the rate of non-LGBT people. And I think what your experience illustrates is that quite often those experiences of homelessness are triggered by family rejection and lack of acceptance of their sexual orientation. Tell me how you managed to cope emotionally with the fact that your father had been so unaccepting.
I'd like to say I was surprised. I wasn't surprised. And so I feel like I had been preparing myself for the inevitable my whole life. I was aware of my father's homophobia as a toddler. So, and I knew who I was shortly thereafter. So it colored our relationship. And I think I coped with the feelings by being determined enough to prove him wrong, in my mind, right? That I knew who I was, and I had come to a good place in my life about my sexual orientation and who I was. And so I was able to see him and his limitations for what they were. And I really, as angry as I was with him at the time, I also understood that he was a product of his own upbringing and his own background. And that helped me, knowing that helped me deal with it. But I think a lot of it came through processing, through therapy, and through talk with friends and the support system that I had created for myself.
That's, you clearly have extraordinary resilience and fortitude, and it sounds like you had a very close-knit support network among your 5 friends. But one of the things that our research also shows is that too often LGBT teens are subject to bullying and harassment in school, and as a result, show less attachment to school, have lower grades, have fewer prospects once they graduate. What was the reaction of your classmates when the 5 of you were doing your activism and really being openly out?
It wasn't good. You know, we were a bit of the outcasts in our school, but we were also quite active in our school. You know, I was a part of the band, the choir, and the theater department. I was also part of the student body, and all, you know, the other 4 were at the top of our class, and all incredibly active. So we were pretty high profile in our class. And, you know, it was the 90s. I have to preface this by saying there was something in the air in the 90s, right? I think we had come to a place because Bill Clinton was in office, and he was talking about LGBTQ people. Well, he was talking about gay and lesbian people at the time. You know, there was something happening in pop culture also that gave us the confidence to live as openly as we did. And so, you know, we had what's the word I want to use? The arrogance of youth working for us at the time. You know, we thought of ourselves as pretty militant, you know, and so we didn't really take a lot of harassment from people, and we fought back, to be honest with you.
That's, I think that shows, again, extraordinary resilience, and I'm sure has served you well through your career.
And we were all smart asses too. Like, you know, I mean, you couldn't tell us anything. We were 5 of the smartest kids in school, you know, so if idiots came at us, you know, we knew how to get back.
I would say you also were something of a trailblazer, because we've also done analyses of the ages at which different cohorts of LGBT people have come out to their families and others. And one of the things that we've discovered is that people are coming out at younger ages than they used to. So whereas those who are currently middle-aged didn't come out until they were in their 20s, younger people are coming out in their teens.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like you were aware even earlier than that about sexual orientation.
Yeah, I mean, I may not have said it out loud, but I know that I pretty much knew what I was and who I was when I was preteen, at least. I probably couldn't put a name to it, but I knew that I was different from other boys, that's for sure. Yeah.
So I want to take a few questions from the audience about this experience. And I do see in the chat box, and I should have said at the beginning, please do, if you have questions, enter them into the chat box and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. There's a big fan of Noah's Ark who's put something in the chat box, which we'll get to down the road. But right now, let me ask you another question that we've received, which is, do you think that the development of gay characters in the media, and in particular My So-Called Life, has provided the kind of emotional support and acceptance that has contributed to people coming out at younger ages?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, you know, I think that visibility in media, in entertainment and culture, visibility of LGBTQ people is incredibly important. And I think there is a sense of freedom that you gain when you know you are not alone, when you see yourself mirrored back and your experiences, your lived experience mirrored back to you. It fortifies you. And so I do think that, you know, young people watch television, they go to the movies, they listen to music, and I think it does free them when we step out of our own boxes, declare ourselves. I think, for me anyway, I know that I had them in mind when I came out. I knew that I had young people in mind when I decided to come out publicly. So I hope so. I truly do. I hope that that's true, yes.
So this is a good segue into your illustrious career. So My So-Called Life was your first role in any entertainment medium. Were they specific? No.
Okay. Oh, no. Well, I mean, I had been, you know, I'd done a lot of theater. I'd done a couple of jobs before that allowed me to get into the union. I was, you know, a theater major in college and all of that. But yeah, so My So-Called Life was the first big, it was definitely a breakthrough for me, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And were they specifically looking for a gay man to play this gay character?
I don't think Winnie Holzman would say that she was looking for someone who was gay specifically. I think they got lucky, and I think you know, I was very upfront about it when I auditioned for it. As a matter of fact, when I auditioned for the role, I went through the 2 scenes that I was asked to perform, and before I walked out the door, because I didn't know whether or not I was ever going to see these people again, before I walked out the door, I turned around and said to Mary Goldberg, the casting director, God rest her soul, that if she would do me a favor and tell whoever wrote this, that it would have really meant a lot to me as a 15-year-old boy to see that character on television, and to give that person my thanks. And she turned to me and said, don't you worry about it. You're going to be able to tell her yourself. And so I did. So I was very open with the entire creative team and the network. And I was also really clear about the fact that I was going to come out publicly if and when the series was picked up.
That's a wonderful series it was, but there is a groundswell of excitement for me to ask you about Noah's Ark, which I think was an extremely influential show for many facing the HIV epidemic. Talk to us a little bit about your experiences on that show, about the messages that it sent, about the acceptance that you gained through doing it.
You know, the thing about Noah's Ark that is so, that's so powerful for people is we had never seen, I mean, Noah's Ark literally changed the face of television. We had never seen this many African-American and Latino openly gay men and their lives before. And so it was a watershed moment for a lot of people. And the power that comes from seeing yourself and your lived experience portrayed back to you is really empowering. And you know, I played not only an openly gay doctor, but I played an openly gay, openly HIV positive doctor who was working within the HIV field. And so there was a lot of opportunity there, not only for storytelling, but for education. And as we know, brown men who sleep with men are pretty high up in terms of the percentage of people who contract the disease. So it was important for us to have that conversation within our own community. But you know, the importance of that show and the freedom that it gave people can't be overstated.
That I think it was so seminal for so many people in our audience, and we all thank you. But that was a show built around LGBT-related themes. Now you're on Star Trek, where you and Anthony Rapp, who I saw in Rent, by the way.
Yes.
I did not see you, I'm sorry to say.
It's okay.
Yeah, sure.
It was a good one. I really liked it.
Here you are, an out gay couple in a world of straight people. So how does that feel? How does the cast react to you? How do viewers of Star Trek react to the prominence of your relationship in the storyline?
Well, I mean, in terms of the cast, I mean, they couldn't be more supportive and excited. You know, we are an integral part of the story, and I mean, if anything, we are the prime example of true love and the power of that love and the resilience of love through even difficulty. So, you know, in terms of the audience, you know, it had been 52 years of Star Trek on television before there was a truly gay couple on the show, and so people were really enthusiastic and excited to see that. But at the same time, we also felt like, you know, it had been about time since something like that had appeared on the show. So it was overwhelmingly positive. And I think what was even more exciting to people was that that these two characters and their storyline wasn't about the fact that they were two gay men in love. It was just that these were two people who truly loved each other and were truly committed to each other, and were great and genius at their actual jobs that they fulfilled on the ship. So, you know, their sexuality or their sexual orientation was secondary to what was really important, which was that they were helping to save the world.
and you are, both fictionally and in real life. So, our research focuses a lot on the stigma and discrimination to which LGBT people are still, unfortunately, so pervasively subject. And we know that there is extensive employment discrimination, refusals of service, evictions, denial of health care, bullying in school. Across the spectrum of human activity, LGBT people still really tragically face huge amounts of rejection and stigma. And one of the things that our research over decades has shown is that those kinds of stresses and that kind of exposure has real impact on people's mental and physical health, and contributes to the health disparities that we see among the LGBT population. So throughout your career, have you managed to escape that kind of stigma, discrimination, barriers, or have there been occasions where you have faced negative adverse treatment as a result of being an out gay Latino man?
Well, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a man of color living in the United States. So it would be impossible to avoid racism and homophobia. In terms of my career, and I think that's what I think we were getting at. I knew going in that there was a lot of work to be done in terms of the depictions of LGBTQ people on television, especially LGBTQ people of color, which, I'll say this, when I did My So-Called Life in 1994, there were 2 Latinos on television. One of them was me, and the other one was Jimmy Smits on NYPD Blue. That was it. That was a completely different world than we live in now. So I know that there were many roles that I didn't get because I wasn't the right race, or there was a perception of who I was or capable of, or what I was capable of, because of the fact that I was a gay man. But my job, I knew, was to have that conversation. I always see myself, even to this day, as a collaborator. The work that I do doesn't happen in a vacuum. I have to work with directors and producers and writers. And so I would take on roles that weren't necessarily the most attractive to me, but I would take them knowing that I could go in and hopefully work with them and collaborate and make it better and stronger. And if I found myself with willing partners, it would be a successful portrayal and storytelling. So I always, especially in the early days, much more than today, I always felt like when I took a role, it was my responsibility to have dialogue with the creators about how to make it better.
Have you ever played
and I'll say, I'm sorry, what?
Have you ever played a heterosexual?
Yeah, I did. So in Supernova, which I starred in with Angela Bassett and James Spader, which was my first sci-fi experience, that character was straight. Party Monster, Angel, a real life person, we didn't know what his sexual orientation was for sure. We assumed that he was straight. We didn't really know. We didn't have that information, and we couldn't get it because he had died and killed. So, my character's sexual orientation, regardless of whether I play a gay character or not, is usually secondary in terms of how I portray him. it's one of the factors. It's one of many factors that I weigh when I'm creating the character. But, you know, I'll say this, that there were, you know, I wanted to play gay roles on TV and film. I searched them out because I knew that there were very few actors who wanted to play those roles, especially early on. And here I was, willing and excited to play them. So I searched them out. And then when I knew that there weren't, when it was clearly that the industry was less interested in telling our stories, I found ways to work behind the scenes. And so, you know, that was part of my activism. You know, I worked at GLAAD for 2 years, where I spent 2 years working with networks and studios. It was my job to go in there and talk to them about how they could do a better job of expanding the stories that we told about LGBTQ people. So that was part of my career as well.
So at Wilson, you keep offering up these perfect segues into the next segment of our conversation. But let's talk about your role as, I think you call yourself an activist, which I think is a great term. What brought you to more overt activism? And I know you've worked with GLAAD and you've worked with the task force and you've worked with GLSEN. What are the issues that make you passionate, and what kinds of work have you done?
So, you know, I have a relationship with a lot of organizations. The task,
and
the national,
thank goodness, one of them is the Williams Institute.
If they asked, my relationship with the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, LGBTQ Task Force now, actually, sorry. I worked there for 2 years as well, because there were a number of ballot measures that were trying to remove sexual orientation from the human rights ordinances in different municipalities across the country. And so I traveled the country along with the task force to fight those ordinances, and won. The biggest one being in Miami-Dade, which was close, but we won. Anyway, and then I worked at GLAAD, like I said, because I wanted to see more people who looked like me on television. I felt like and I really wanted to be a part of the conversation about having more trans people on television. And I felt like, given my own work history and my resume, that I could walk into those offices and have a kind of conversation that most people could not have. You know, I'll say this, you know, what's important to me, and it's one of the things that drives me crazy. I'll say this, I just finished producing a documentary series called Visible, which is about the history of LGBTQ images on television. And I'm not just saying that so that I'm like, ooh, look at me, what I did. But what was important, what was amazing, was the feedback. But it was also frustrating, because people kept saying, and I experienced this too in the making of it, I didn't know that happened, or I didn't know that that person was gay, or that law was trying to be passed, or that those people did that in order for me to be able to afford the life that I live now. So it was really important for me to be able to tell that history. But I'm even more passionate about the fact that this history should be taught in our schools. You know, there is a lack of inclusive curriculum across this country. There are 6 states where it's illegal for you to teach any LGBTQ history. So, you know, the reason why I think it's important is because the reaction to this documentary has been really overwhelming, and the way that people talk about it, with tears in their eyes, and with gratitude, to be able to learn about who we are and where we came from and how we rose up and how we survived and the resilience that we have within our community. We don't get told that. We're not taught that. And I think it would be an incredibly powerful thing for any young person to be able to go to their history class, and when they're talking about 1969, that they are taught about Stonewall and about that uprising and why people were so fed up and angry and what led them to start the fight that leads us to where we are today. I'm passionate about that.
I can tell, and it's inspiring to hear it. So you've talked about your own experiences as a gay man of color, and I know that you do mentorship in the youth community. What do you say to young Latino, gay, or trans, or bi, or lesbian individuals who are facing family rejection, loneliness, an inability to find necessary sources of support? How do you counsel them, and what kind of advice can you give to young people for whom the world can look like a pretty dark place? That's a heavy question.
It is a heavy question, but it's an important one. First, I have to say that yesterday, Out Magazine called me an elder, so I am qualified to answer this question.
Trust me on this.
So first of all, secondly, I should say, I usually get to the root of the problem pretty quickly, and because I want to find a resource, depending on what that issue is, to help them navigate it. So, I mean, I know I sound like a bit of a broken record, but I think there is a dearth of knowledge of resilience, right, in our community, and whenever anyone comes to me with any problem, whether it's in their personal life or their professional life, I try to point out people and circumstances and part of our history that can help inspire them to pick themselves up, right? These days, in terms of being a mentor, I find myself listening more than talking. And I think for so many young people, they just want to be heard. And I try to be a sounding board. I can only speak to them and advise them from my own experience, which a lot of the time can be pertinent to the conversation. But I think when they come to me, they're looking for a reason to continue, a reason to keep going, to wake up the next day and keep fighting the good fight and going on that audition, even though they keep getting rejected, or the overwhelming sadness of having no contact with their families, and advising them on how to create a chosen family and how to do that in a open and loving and beneficial way for all parties. But I think there's something that isn't taught in our schools about that. I just said earlier that that could help with this epidemic of shame that our young people walk around with, and keeps them from achieving their goals. I think the shame that we carry around as LGBTQ people is an issue that we need to face head on.
That is so powerful. And thinking about LGBT youth and LGBT youth of color in particular can be so heartbreaking, because our research shows that they're disproportionately represented in the foster care system, in the juvenile justice system, and sometimes the prospects seem bleak. Are there things that give you hope for the future?
Yeah, they give me hope. I mean, I think I think this generation of young people that's coming up now that aren't getting their high school graduation this year are going to save us. I think the way they see the world, the way that they walk through it, is going to change how we walk through it. I think this, what's the word I'm looking for? This sense that they bring in terms of accepting people's differences and celebrating them, acknowledging a person's pronouns, talking about gender issues, you know, the way that they look at sexual orientation and race issues in our country, you know, is incredibly inspiring. You know, they have a different conversation than we did. So, and they walk through the world in a more accepting and loving way than we did. So that gives me a tremendous amount of hope.
That's tremendous. So we have a number of audience members who are in Latin and South America. Talk to me a little bit about whether you think that American media productions, whether it's television or movies or even theater, can have an impact internationally on changing attitudes, creating more acceptance, building the possibility for dialogue between LGBT people and non-LGBT people.
You know, TV and film, American TV and film is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest exports this country offers. And because of that, it's incredibly powerful and can change people's perspectives. You look at something like Angels in America, for instance, which was on HBO, which was a miniseries that traveled the world and helped educate. I think about Queer as Folk. You know, Queer as Folk was a great show. We loved it here in the States, but what people don't know is that internationally it was a sensation. And we covered this in the documentary, which is the biggest LGBTQ website in China is Queer as Folk. Queer as Folk something China. But literally this website was created to talk about the show, and it ended up being a resource for LGBTQ people in China to be able to talk to each other on the DL. Noah's Ark, for instance, you know, was unavailable in Africa, but it was available in the black market, and you could get a hold of it. And it spread throughout the continent. It's incredible that we hear to this day from people who talk about having seen Noah's Ark, you know, in Africa, and how it helped them understand that they weren't alone in the world. So yeah, I think that it can be incredibly powerful, and it can be a catalyst for change in people's governments and lives and in their culture.
It's so important, and the contributions you've made are so enduring. Is there a story that you would love to see written for you, or that you're prepared to write yourself?
Oh, you know, I have a dream project. I'll just say it. I've always wanted to play Prince. I wanted to tell that story. But anyway, but that's not what you're getting at. Yeah, there's a couple of scripts that I'm hashing out at the moment. You know, I'm a producer now, so I might have a little more pull these days. But you know, I'm the kind of actor who when when I receive a script, it feels like a gift. I'm excited when I receive it. I love when a producer or a writer says, I read this, I think you'd be great for it. And reading that and seeing how I could fit into it and make it work or not, is one of my favorite parts of the process. So I love when someone has written something and goes, "Oh, I know who I want for this." I love that collaborative spirit.
Mm-hmm. So do you think about directing ever?
I do, especially since I'm bossy. And Anthony Rapp is going to do it first. He's going through the process of perhaps directing down the line on Trek. And I might follow in his footsteps afterwards. It's been a little nuts in the last couple of years because I've been working on a few projects at the same time. Because the first two seasons I did the first two seasons of Trek, I was also doing 13 Reasons Why, and then this last season I was working on the documentary. So trying to stay sane.
I hear you. And speaking of sanity, how are you managing to maintain your mental health and your equanimity in these really challenging times?
Well, I will be upfront and vulnerable and say it has been difficult. I'm in this apartment and I've been locked down pretty much for the last 8 weeks, and I'm living here alone, and so I'm isolated alone. And so I've used social media a lot to help feel connected and to offer a place for people to feel connected to me. So twice a week, I go on to Instagram Live, and I bring other people on who request to speak to me, and I'll pick a topic and we'll talk about it for a little while. I'll check in on how they're doing, and then I'll bring on a special guest. Like tomorrow, I'm going to have Broadway Cynthia Erivo on. I had Laverne Cox the other day. I had Alec Mapa last week. But it's my way of checking in on folks, see how they're doing, but also it gives me an opportunity to feel connected to people. Yeah, these are pretty dark times. My part of my problem is that I'm here in California and my immediate family is on the East Coast. So my brother and his husband and my nephew are in New York. My other brother and my parents are in Florida, which really worries me, given what's happening there and with their state government. So that's anxiety inducing for me because they are everything to me. So yeah, I've made sure that they have been locked down for 8 weeks. I'm that person in my family where I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. You're shutting it down.
That is an extraordinary kindness to them, and I hope that you see them a lot on Zoom and Facebook.
My mother actually called me right before we started, and I was like, I'm going to call you back when I'm done. She's probably watching. Hi, Mom.
So I just wanted to follow up on one thing you said about the fact that you're now a producer and might want to direct, and I have the opportunity of a lifetime for you, which is that the Williams Institute will be celebrating its 20th anniversary this next year. And we're looking to produce a video about our trailblazing history. We were started by Chuck Williams, a real pioneer in LGBT research and the recognition that you need facts and data to counteract stereotypes. And that was back in 2001 when I think you were about 15.
No, I was much older, but thank you for that.
Should you want to be an artistic consultant on our anniversary video,
I would consider that.
Your help.
That absolutely.
Is tremendous. So listen, I think sadly we are just about out of time, but I do have one last question for you, which is, when is season 3 of Star Trek Discovery going to arrive?
So the party line is soon. That's my answer. But you know, I'll expand on it by saying people are very, very, very hard at work right now as we speak on post-production. You know, we finished filming season 3 at the end of February, I want to say. But you know, that's when the hard work actually begins. You know, we're a very special effects heavy show. There's a lot of music. The music is gorgeous and it's recorded, you know, with a full orchestra. You know, sound and all of that has to happen in post-production. So it's a lot of work, and all of these people are doing it from their homes. So it's just going to take a little longer. So I can guarantee you that it'll be out before the end of the year.
We will all look forward to it tremendously.
I would hope that it's actually much sooner than the end of the year, but that's a safe bet.
But in the interim, it sounds like we can catch you on Instagram, on Facebook Live, and on various means to stay in touch and hear more from you. I just want to thank you so very much for being with us this evening. It's been a wonderful, inspiring, really motivating conversation. I am starstruck. So
no.
I will look forward to thanking you in person when this period is behind us. I'd also like to thank our supporters, in particular CBS, that made tonight possible, and all of you. Your support is so critical and so important to us, and we are so grateful to be part of such a wonderful, generous, supportive, committed, tenacious, resilient community. So Wilson, thank you so very much. Thank you, all of you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. Can I say one last thing?
Please.
I just want to tell people to continue to support the LGBT organizations that they have always supported. They are our lifeline. They are how we continue to make progress in this country and around the world. So please continue to support the Williams Institute and GLSEN and GLAAD and all of these organizations that are doing everything to make our lives possible.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Good night.